Welcome everyone to the Economics Undergraduate Career Forum and to our guests. Thank you so much for being here. Knowing how hard our students and faculty and the ECHO work, I'm not surprised how well our graduates do in securing internships and jobs, even in this labor market. Just to give you a quick summary, our graduates in the last couple years have entered such fields as banking and finance, consulting, environmental science, government, healthcare, IT, law, marketing, public administration, urban planning. I wish I could, learn from them as they work in these great jobs out in the real world, because I teach some of these topics. And some of the employers who have hired our graduates in the last couple of years include Accenture, Booz Allen Hamilton, Deloitte, Cornerstone Research, Goldman Sachs, the Federal Reserve, Google, the IMF, Mastercard, where Fed works, Oracle, Palantir, Urban Institute, Uber, the US Department of Defense, the US Department of State, Wayfair. And our Zoom moderator will enter a website with all of those postgraduate outcomes for the last several years of for our majors. And for those of you who haven't declared a major yet, you should know that not only do economics majors build a strong theoretical and empirical toolkit, but success in the major also helps students develop good communication skills, critical thinking, and an understanding of data analysis. I think you'll hear from the panel that the economic skills that you learn in the class are just a small part of what the major is about. I want to get a sense of who's out there in the Zoom room. So if you can enter in the chat your year and your major, third year Econ, second year undeclared, we'd like to see kind of for the range of people out there, what the audience is like. And you can enter that to everyone so everyone can see. And meanwhile, I want to ask the panelists, we're going to open up for them to tell us their stories. I'm going to ask some questions, then we'll have Q&A from the students. As we go along and talk, enter your questions in the chat, specifically for Zach, because he's going to coordinate the questions, Zach Garfinkel, as the panel coordinator. So panelists, so Fed, Morgan, John, I know that each of you has many stories, and we could spend a whole hour listening to you talk about those stories of your job and of your life. I want to keep the focus on insights that you can offer to our students about data and analytics and life, and those of us, and I'll put you in the us category of people who are long past being a student, and we can forget what it's like to contemplate that vast, exciting, scary, undefined future. And so I want you to try to tell the story that connects your life from back then to where you are now. So to start, I just want to hear from each of you, and we can start with John. How did you come to be in your current job, and what does your job title mean?
So right now I'm a basketball columnist for The Athletic. Before that, I worked for the Memphis Grizzlies for 7 years as the vice president of basketball operations, and before that, I was with ESPN for 8 years. And really the way I came to that was sort of through the applied science, very much like economics, just applied to the real world. I was an econ major. I graduated in '93, double major econ and environmental science. Don't really do a whole lot with geology these days, but the econ is very much still a part of my day to day. And the thing is, like, I don't know how familiar you guys are with basketball or what I do or anything. Like, one of the things
I am totally familiar with basketball. Like, we could spend the next hour talking about that.
Yeah.
Let's not talk about
this 3-game losing streak.
I know,
right?
I know.
Yeah. So the thing I invented is called player efficiency rating, and it's basically an applied economic model at the end of the day, with certain assumptions built in, because at the end of the day, when you're dealing with real world data and you're not able to conduct very specific scientific experiments with a controlled environment, that you have to make assumptions. The data is always going to be messy, and you have to just kind of go from there. And it's really where, the saying goes, the art meets the science is really true. And so I've created a lot of statistics and models since then that kind of follow from that. But that's where I think the economic training was so important for what I did. I mean, yes, I had to be a compulsive basketball fan too, and I had to be able to write about it and explain it, which was the other part that's really important. But at the end of the day, understanding kind of how to do applied science where things are a little messy is just so hugely valuable in the real world.
That's so interesting to hear about, I think we're trying to teach theory as this sort of careful, neat thing, but then actually applying it to the real world, which I do in my own research, even though, I might sit in an ivory tower, is, it is messy. And so hearing about how you make that bridge, I think is really insightful. Morgan, can you tell us a little bit about that and about your professional life?
Sure. Yeah. So my job title is I'm the executive vice president of baseball operations at Major League Baseball. So I oversee our competitive system. So all our rules, the economic system, our labor agreements, our drug policy, all everything kind of related to the competition in the game. And like John, I sort of was initially attracted to baseball. At UVA, believe it or not, I read a book called Moneyball, which many of you've probably heard of, and it opened my eyes to that being a career that you could potentially have. I had actually just finished getting cut from the UVA baseball team after trying out, and I was sort of on a look for what I might be able to do, because it was clear that baseball was not going to be it. So I actually got hooked up with Coach O'Connor, started doing some stats for the baseball team, working for them, helping with whatever camps and, uniforms and did recruiting. And it was a great exposure for me. And they helped me get some internships with pro teams. And I ended up actually going into management consulting right after UVA. It's just a much easier job to get than working in sports. But all the while I think was trying to find a way back into baseball. So I was able to get a job in the league office, and it's funny, I've actually watched since I graduated in 2007. I would have considered myself like an analytical person at that time, because I could build an Excel model and because I was, pretty good with numbers. And I have watched now, it would be like a joke for me to call myself an analytical person now, just given the sophistication that, people like John are bringing to sports analysis these days. We have like PhDs at every baseball team in machine learning and applied statistics, and they speak a language that I don't even speak. So my job today is a lot more about taking some of the insights that come from that sophisticated analysis through the policy process at the league level, and helping inform decisions we make about our labor agreements with our unions, our playing rules, our competitive system, et cetera. So I quickly got outclassed, I think, in the analytical area, but I try to at least remain conversant in it, so that I can do my job.
I think that's this experience of many of us who, as we move along in our careers, is it's really the youngest people who are coming into our organizations who are bringing the frontier skills. So that's really interesting to hear. Fed, can you talk a little bit about how, about your job and what your job title means?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm currently Senior Vice President of Pricing and Investment Strategy at Mastercard, which may not mean a lot, but what I'm responsible for is setting a strategy for one of our businesses that comprises, about a third of all of Mastercard. And commercially, how are we going to get to specific goals using pricing and how we invest our resources? So when you kind of distill it that way, I'm just another person in an island in an economic model. I have two tools I can use: pricing, how much I charge for the goods I provide, and how I can invest or save the resources that I have at my disposal that I generate. Like that at the end of the day is it. And, like I'm explaining it this way because really part of the reason I got into econ is very similar to what John and Morgan said. Like I consider myself an analytical person. I like going through the motion of taking a complicated problem and framing it into something simpler, into the elements I can control, making assumptions about what I can't, and actually making sense of it, right? So shortly after UVA, I went to a small company that was called APT. It was a startup, all about doing testing control analytics and applying it to the real world. So very much no nonsense. How can we take something really complex, much more advanced than what other places were doing, and how could we translate it into something that could actually turn out to be a very specific decision? About 5-6 years after I was there, we actually got acquired by Mastercard, and I'm still there. But what I do now is much broader. However, I still get to play around with taking something complicated, like how do I scale something that could go to thousands of banks in the world, and actually distill it to a number of very specific decisions. It's all economics at the end of the day. I'll give you one more example. I actually just came from a meeting where we were talking about how we're going to approach something particularly, and I get to bring up some of the foundational concepts that you can learn in econ, right? You have to price about your marginal cost, right? Unless you're taking a different aspect, right? Those small concepts, they don't go away. It's just that you learn to apply them in a much more different way. And that's what gets me up in the morning.
I think I heard that from all of you, that basically you're thinking in different ways in terms of, marginal cost, marginal benefit, and so on, these things that we start teaching from our principles courses. But besides that, I see you're all talking about data and thinking carefully about what data can tell you, what messy data can tell you about the world. So those are common threads I see that we start with in our econ courses. And the other thing I heard from all of you is that you've all gone through different workplaces. You started one place, you end up someplace else. So can you say a little bit about what, from a student's perspective, how do you prepare for that job market, especially if you're coming from an econ major, if you're thinking about these data and analytics jobs, how do you get ready, both in terms of technical skills, or there's specific programming languages, but also kind of mentally, how do you think about approaching all that? Fed, we can go back to you.
I'm happy to start. So I think, one of the benefits that econ and some of the related applied sciences have is you can really apply it to anything, right? Like I'll actually reference what Morgan said. When I was at UVA and I read Moneyball, my first reaction was, wow, this is so cool. I never thought you could take these concepts and apply them this way, right? So when I talk to folks that are younger, the one thing I always say is, it doesn't matter what you study, it's how you apply it. Can you create a framework that allows you to solve real world problems in a very, tangible way, in a very no nonsense way? That's what you got to be able to show. Because if you know Python, if you know R, if you know SAS, it doesn't matter, right? Can you apply it to solve a problem? That's the key thing. Now, I'll mention one other thing. Having the right technical balance is good, right? Being able to show that you've learned things like Python or some of the more newer data science tools is always good. But being able to convey that you can apply it and you can translate to the real world is much more important. Think about it this way. You may know one language or another language. You can learn that on the job. There's fantastic tools online where, like, I'll be honest, I learned Python last year. I took a massive online course. It was a few weeks, and it was a great way for me to actually see what's out there now, right? So it's not necessarily about the specific skill set. It's how you're going to apply it. And if you can convince somebody that you can actually make sense of the real world and that complexity using the tools you have at your disposal.
Morgan, is that something you also see, that it's not just like, can you code in Python or even, Julia or whatever the next language is going to be? Is it that, or is it like how well can you apply that, and how can you connect that to the real world?
Yeah, it's interesting in sports, and I think politics probably would be similar, that so much of the analysis is public, and the quality of the public analysis is so high that it is not unusual at all, at least just speaking for baseball. I mean, John has like lived this experience, for quality analysts in the public sphere to get scooped up by teams that view that guy as, that guy or girl as a competitive advantage, right? If our teams are constantly hiring people that are posting a research paper that they put together based on publicly available information, because they think that guy figured out something about curveballs that no one ever knew before. And I think democratizing the opportunity has been great for baseball, because anyone with a laptop and some open source software can get in the ring and can participate in the conversation around analysis of baseball data. Again, John's probably like the world expert on this, so I'll probably let him address it. But it has really created a lot of career opportunities for people to, just in the baseball world, it's Fangraphs, Hardball Times, Baseball Prospectus, all these websites that are devoted to the, analysis of the game of baseball.
John, is that the case? Do you see a lot of that bubbling up from?
That was literally how I got hired by the Grizzlies. So yeah, that's definitely the case in the NBA world as well, and still is. I would say two key things that I'll bring up here are, one, the ability to explain the work you're doing is so important, and write about it and describe it in a way that's readable and entertaining and conveys a message and maybe tells a story. And a lot of that is just practice. Like when I was in college, I was not a particularly good writer. I just did it a lot because I started, this thing called the internet came along in 1995, and I had something called a blog, even though the word blog didn't exist yet. And just by writing on that every day, I got better at it. And that's how I eventually was able to tell a story about these numbers I was working with as well. And that's the thing that really made the impression, is that I could convey the message that was within the data too. And I think internally in any organization, just, the way internal politics of almost any organization work, you have to be able to convey that message too, and tell a story with it that is convincing to a person who maybe isn't 6 feet deep in that data. And then the other element I would say for any career choice is, it's always easier if you can establish a niche that's either underserved or not served at all. I was fortunate enough to get into basketball analytics at a time when it was almost an empty field, right? So it was easy for me to establish myself in that field at that time because of that. It would be a lot harder, honestly, for me to do the same thing now that I did 25 years ago, just because there's just a lot more good work, good research being done in that area. But that doesn't mean there aren't other underserved areas and underserved niches, and you see it all the time. And it's just a question of, really keeping your eyes open for what is that opportunity, what is that underserved area, and, can my skills kind of fit into that and create a niche for myself? I kind of call it the master of the pan flute theory, right? Like, of course, Zamfir is the master of the pan flute. He's the only one that plays it. So, you can create that opportunity for yourself a little bit if you're the only person or one of the few people in that niche, and you become sort of this automatic go-to.
Fed, in your area, I don't know if there's this analog of, the sports blog out there, but I'm wondering if it's more like in your case with like startups and small companies that are trying to innovate.
There is. It's been a huge change. When I got into technology, the game was everybody had their own proprietary analytics, but both to Morgan and John's point, we've democratized a lot of this today. And companies are now looking to get the best tools and get them to work with each other. And if you don't have a way to open up what you're doing, while obviously protecting your intellectual property, it's going to be a lot more challenging, right? Because what's stopping somebody with better ideas to come and code something that performs better than what you developed in-house, right? And so the pace at which you have to be able to keep up is accelerated. But think about it this way: Microsoft owned GitHub now, right? Who would have thought that would be the case 20 years ago, right? 30 years ago. We're at a point in time where the ability to transparently do this, I think, and actually collaborate on it has really pushed us further. But also, it's just so much more. What we can do is so much more powerful. You can grab TensorFlow today, write 5 lines of code, and you can write a neural network. 10 years ago, that was not a thing. Like when I took multivariate statistics at UVA, what we got taught was this is the way you could write this if you had the processing power to do it. Now you can write 5 lines of code and get there. And so what I think it's doing, it's leveling the playing field to those that can take those tools, because the power is available to anybody, and actually consolidate them into great ways to thinking. I'll reinforce what John and Morgan said. I placed in the top 3 in my fantasy football leagues the last 2 years. My model that I use for my draft is on GitHub. I've used open source stuff, right? Like nothing stopped me from doing it, right? And by the way, people can use my ideas and I can benefit from them, and business is starting to go there. So things that I talk about in my world, open banking is all about that. How can I plug in across services to let my customer have the best they need? How do I plug in artificial intelligence to solve, things like know your customer authentication? Like those things were very, very, I don't want to call them secretive, but siloed. And now all of a sudden they're open source tools that allow you to democratize it and bring about better ideas. That has just completely changed the world that I work in.
Yeah, I want to reference a few of our classes that give students experience with tools like that. We have classes on machine learning, market design, artificial intelligence, empirical industrial organization, auction theory, and even though it has theory in the word, in the title, students are looking at real world auction design. And auction design is a thing in the internet too. It's a thing for public policy like auctioning spectrum or auctioning timber rights, but it's also a thing for Google because they have instant auctions for their ads. So all of these, many of these tools connect to jobs in this data analytics area. And data analytics also is a big deal in the public sector and nonprofits. So don't think of it as only just a money-making thing or an entrepreneurial thing. So do put questions if you have them in the Q&A for in the chat for Zach. In the meantime, I want to ask just a little bit more about, how do you conduct an interview with someone coming out of college today, in your firm or for people that, for in the hiring process, how should students prepare for that? I don't know any of the 3 of you, if you want to jump in.
I would say when I was with the Grizzlies, we did this a fair amount, not so much now since I'm writing for a different organization. I'm not really interviewing people anymore, but the 2 things I think that really stood out are demonstrate passion and then demonstrate skill, right? Like, so if you can demonstrate that, yes, I have these X skills that you're looking for, that's obviously important. And it's not just writing them down on a resume necessarily. It's saying, hey, look, if you go to this link, you can see all the things that I did with this. You can, see this model I built or whatever, or, something I wrote, or point people to something that demonstrates that you can do the work that they're looking for you to do. And then that also is indicative of passion, as well as how you come across, obviously, personally in an interview. That you went to the trouble to do this. It shows that it's something, obviously, this is a topic you care about a little bit. And it's not just an interview you're kind of showing up at, hoping to get paid. So
Morgan, and Morgan, you may also be past the point of like directly interviewing people coming out of college, but what is your advice?
Yeah, so we do, I kind of stole from my consulting experience, the case interview method, where that's typically how we interview people. It's obviously generally kind of baseball type situations. And, for example, one of the questions we ask people about is relocating the Oakland A's. If that was your job, where would you send them? How would you evaluate the different options? What would be things you think about? And I just have always found over the years that format and actually getting to work through something with someone, gives you 2 big benefits. One is you get to sort of see them work, you see them think, see them collaborate with another person, think through a problem. you can touch on, analytical elements of the question. You can touch on more strategic elements of the question, and you can kind of take it where it goes. So in terms of preparation, I mean, I found that actually learning the case method before I started with interviews was very helpful, even if your interview isn't a strict case interview, just to help, a lot of the basics of, conducting yourself in a business environment and dealing with people that do that all day. I found that kind of structuring your thinking and communicating effectively, that was very helpful preparation for me.
Fed, you've been nodding your head, but I also do want to mention, I think we're having a session on case interview preparation as well. Fed, do you want to say a little more?
No, I basically agree with Morgan. I take a similar approach. I also use a case interview. I'll add two pieces. It's important to practice because one, you may think, well, in the real world, you'll have calculators, but when you're in a meeting with 5 other people, you don't want to be taking out your phone and punching numbers. You're kind of talking through, it's a conversation. So actually being comfortable with that approach and being able to show that you think on the fly is a real world skill you use. The other piece of why it's important to practice case interviews is because, when somebody on my team is interviewing people, we're not looking for who can solve a case question. We're looking who's comfortable and can bring their own thoughts to them. So you have to reach that minimum level of comfort. So then your true self can shine. Right? Like, I don't want to see somebody solve the same problem in the same way everybody else does. I want to see the pieces that make you unique. But getting to that point requires you to be comfortable with that base part of the question.
Now, the practice thing, I tell my students also at the undergraduate and graduate level, practice your presentations, practice describing your project to your mother. So it's actually understandable to someone who hasn't been, thinking about it for the last 3 weeks. And you can practice with your roommates, things like that. I think some of the students, who are listening might feel like there's sort of a chicken and egg problem. Like, if they don't have any real world experience and no one's going to give them a job, how do they get that experience to talk about, in an interview? So how do they solve that problem? Morgan, you're kind of nodding or.
Yeah, no, that's a fair concern. I mean, I think like UVA, just in my experience relative to a lot of other schools, I think does a really good job of helping prepare you to operate in the real world. Like, for example, just like putting on this conference, right? There's like just a lot more student engagement in like stuff outside the classroom than at most universities. And all that stuff, even though what you're working on ultimately may stay within Charlottesville, it's a lot more comparable to what your working life is going to be like than some of the stuff sometimes that you're doing in a classroom, right? Where you're really getting kind of academic and theory based. But when you're putting on a charity event or you're a concert or whatever, you're focused on. I mean, that's frankly like very similar to what work being in the working world is like. So I think, and there's a way to talk about that experience in job interviews that makes it relevant and applicable to that kind of thing. And the other thing is you do have to, I think, be pretty aggressive about chasing opportunities, whether it's during the school year or in the summers, but just trying to get some exposure to organizations or roles that, can help you learn about an industry, help you decide whether or not you want to head in that direction with your career. I know it's hard and everybody's kind of scrambles for internships, but if you can end up doing something where at a minimum you'll be able to cross something off your list, as like I definitely don't want to do that. That was kind of my experience with management consulting, right? Like I pursued that because it was easy, it was on grounds. It was like just they come to you and they try to hire you, right? Unlike other career options. But I realized on my second day that this is a really bad fit for me. I don't enjoy this and I don't want to do this. But it was helpful to actually be able to make that decision, right, with information. So I don't know if I directly answered your question, but
it's okay to make mistakes, or it's helpful to make mistakes as part of what you're saying.
Oh yeah, you have a lot more time than you think.
Mm-hmm.
That is for sure. As long as you're crossing something off, you're making progress.
Zach, do we have any questions?
Yeah, we do. So one student wants to ask Morgan about Big League Advance and how that plays into MLB's economic and competitive system.
Yeah, good question. So I'm guessing most of you guys don't know what Big League Advance is. It's actually started by a UVA grad who I knew when I was at UVA. He pitched on the team. His name's Michael Schwimmer. He started a business called Big League Advance, where what they do is they go to minor league baseball players and they buy out percentages of their future career earnings for an upfront payment. So, and it's a pretty clever business model because when you're a minor league player, your chances of making it to the big leagues at all, much less making it, making a fortune in the big leagues, are very small. So for 90% of their clients, they do better by taking these deals, right? So you take a $200,000 payment, you give up 10% of your career earnings, and you go from there. And they had their first big payday last week. Fernando Tatis Jr., who plays for the Padres, has a deal with them, signed a $340 million contract, and owes Big League Advance a big chunk of that money. And their return on that investment is enormous. Now, we have some concerns with the model, and the Players Association does as well, the union. I think that, on the surface, it's totally reasonable and a sort of like rational business opportunity for, an entrepreneur. I think that what we've tried to do is keep it in the lane of, a player and a family with full information, making a decision about their future versus you could see how this could pretty quickly become more predatory or more like payday lending, or, because our players come from all different sorts of backgrounds, and there are competitors to Big League Advance that have entered this space too. And it's kind of similar type thing. So we are trying to work out exactly sort of what their role long term is going to be. We don't have, frankly, a lot of control over it. I mean, it's, we don't regulate them or anything, but it's a new product on the scene, and it's been very interesting because they have a lot of takers among players.
Yeah, that sounds like some of the same tensions involved in basketball, for example. Do you stay in college another year? Do you go try for the NBA? How do you weigh the people who are giving you advice about those things? I guess, John, is that something?
Yeah, there's a whole seamy underside to that business too, without a doubt. And there's some of that happens too on a shorter time frame, where agents will essentially give a player an advance before he signs his first contract. Hopefully he's doing it after his last college game. And then they'll, end up basically paying that back once they have their first contract, hopefully. So there is some of that happens. It's not quite on the scale with Big League Advance. Although we're seeing more of this type of thing where, like, the NBA's developmental league is called the G League, is signing players directly out of high school who aren't interested in doing a year in college before they're eligible for the NBA draft. They signed four players this year, essentially to contracts that will pay them this year, and then they'll put themselves in the draft next year. So it's a different way for them to make that step from high school to the NBA. We have it's a collectively bargained agreement between the players and the league that they're not eligible to be in the draft until their age 19 year, basically. So even if you're 17 years old and you're awesome and you're the best basketball player in the world, you still can't play in the NBA.
Zach, do we have some more questions?
Yeah, our next question is for Fed, and the student asked, can you expand on your transition from product management to pricing and investment strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess for context, I used to be in product management, which is a combination of actually setting a product roadmap, a vision for what a business or a set of products is going to go to, what you're going to invest in, while also balancing, like, actually managing that business, right? Like, what's my revenue growth? How does it translate to my profitability? So it's a little bit of a balancing of the commercial and the kind of technical side of things. And when I kind of transitioned over to this function, you know, a question that came up when I was interviewing a lot was, why are you interested in doing this? This isn't product management. And what I tell folks is, you know, to some degree it is. I'm doing it at a much bigger scale. Instead of focusing on one product portfolio, I'm actually focusing on an entire part of a company, but I'm still going through very similar actions. I'm thinking about the health of the business. What are the metrics I need to track? How do I actually solve for getting here in 5 years? And I have different tools. Now my roadmap is more commercial than product based, but at the same time, it's all about kind of that balancing act of, where do I double down? Where do I divest? How do I become more aggressive or more competitive in the places that I'm going to push forward in? And that's kind of why I like it. What I've really enjoyed about it is actually I can bring analytics to it. So there are ways you could go about pricing where you say, I think this is the way the world works, and you can just go and do it. But I'm pushing our teams to actually bring in data. So look at, you know, how one of your products is used. Well, how do you price the piece that is more widely used versus the one that you actually want to penetrate with, right? Those questions you could answer based on assumptions, but it's so much more rich when you have data behind it. So that's kind of the parallel. The difference for me, when I went from product management to pricing and investments, was that I long to take focus of a broader part of our business than one particular piece, right? So think about it this way. I was very, very deep in one particular part of what Mastercard does. And now I'm actually challenged with taking a broader stake and solving for, how do I empower those that are actually having that deep knowledge to make the right decisions?
So Fed, I'm thinking about, you know, some of what you said, having a team, and I'm wondering also about, you know, who else do you engage with who needs to have some of this knowledge? Is it consultants, lawyers, you know, the people who produce the data? I'm thinking about different kind of career tracks for our students.
Yeah, I work with a pretty wide variety of folks. So my, you know, one of my partners in crime, so I'm technically part of the strategy team, right? So I'm supposed to set that long-term roadmap. So off the bat, I'm working with folks that have management consulting backgrounds, right? They're thinking about our long-term strategy. They're setting that more qualitative vision. Our CFO, I work very closely with, because any decision I make is going to impact our revenue streams, our profitability. You know, I can make decisions on that, but it's actually, you know, his responsibility to make sure that we're balancing that correctly. I work a lot with what we call our insights and enablement team, who are in charge of actually managing our internal data, creating those rich data sources about how we are going to business and how people are using our products to actually do that. So that's a team internally of very smart engineers and data scientists who I work with very closely to actually harmonize our data, make sense of it, distill it, and ultimately to what Morgan and John said is I have to be able to explain it, and my team has to be able to explain it in a very, you know, direct way to folks that maybe are in this, you know, knee deep in those details. And the other group I work with is product management, right? Those folks that are actually making, you know, product roadmap decisions of what do I build and what does it mean and how do I actually sequence that story over a longer period of time. So it's very nice that I get to work with a broad variety of folks. On a personal level, what I will say is, even though I'm now focused on something much more broader, I have not put aside my desire to work with data. So my team knows it. I have access to our databases, and sometimes when I want an answer, I pull it myself, right? It's easier. It lets me get a little bit of that kind of more technical knowledge, so that when I have to turn around and explain why something works the way it works, I can actually draw those comparisons. So to me, one of the most important things that I've learned in the more senior stages of my career is striking the right balance between focusing at a high level, but also having that, you know, ground floor, very technical knowledge. I think when you can find that balance, it's really powerful, because you can convey strategy, and you can turn around and you can work very hands-on with folks actually getting to those insights and be part of that process.
So I'm going to have one final question, but I think we can take one more from the audience, Zach.
Sure. One student asks, what specific programming languages, technical skills, and software do you use for your job, and how do you use it?
Okay, we
And
can
this
go
is for
Fed, Morgan,
21.
John on this.
So at work, Excel is just great for just, any simpler model. I use Python personally. I've only recently learned it, but I just found it to be easy enough to grasp and, to honestly just crank out something simple. But on a professional basis, for better or for worse, Excel still just allows you to be flexible enough to just do something simple.
Morgan?
Yeah, I'm over my skis beyond Excel, really. But the baseball world, for whatever reason, has settled on R as the application that most baseball data gets analyzed with. And most of our clubs are sort of focused in that area. Yeah, I think
That's an
for
example
me personally, I don't have much of a skill set beyond Excel.
I think
There was
that's
a day though when I was quite the Excel wizard, but
Yeah.
it's kind of come and gone.
Well, it's interesting how these initial conditions, in Econ, we're using Stata, but I think we should be using R or Python. But we're all kind of old people like me are stuck with that. John, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I still bang out 99% in Excel. It's just really useful, and I know it, and I've used it for years. Although I actually started on Lotus 1-2-3 back in the day.
I remember that too.
There you go.
For the old timers.
And John, what are the young folks using in your area?
I mean, I do think on the NBA side, there's a lot of people using R. Yeah. And especially when they get in kind of the deeper data analysis and whatnot. The other thing I taught myself back in the day was how to do HTML, which is like, it's a dead skill now. It doesn't matter anymore because they have all these new tools now who do it for you. But it's a good example of, like, you teach yourself something, but then the world catches up, and it doesn't stop once you leave UVA. Like, you got to keep learning and adding new skills and finding new ways to add value, whether that's with a purely technical skill or in other areas.
So my final question for each of you is a little more abstract. It's how is COVID going to change your job permanently? That's just a little bit my personal interest. Are we going to do these things remote? Is it going to change how you interact with people? Is it going to change how we're finding people with these different skills, or what? John, do you have some insights? Have you been thinking about it?
Yeah, I mean, COVID has definitely changed the NBA. I mean, one of the biggest things with the NBA is evaluation for the draft. And that has totally changed because you can't really go out and see players in person anymore. A, because of the travel risk. B, the arena might not let you in. C, you might go through all that trouble and then the game will get canceled because somebody tested positive. So it's not even worth it, even if it weren't for the first two things. So it's changed the entire way the league goes about evaluating for the draft. And it gets really tricky. Like, when I work for the Grizzlies, I'd go overseas twice a year to check out the best players in Europe. You can't do that anymore. And the footage from over there often isn't nearly as high caliber, shall we say, as from a nationally televised college game here. So it adds definite challenges. It's definitely changing the business in the short term. In the long term, I'm really interested to see what it does to the whole scouting profession, sports, and how much remote scouting becomes a thing, and how much people just go right back to the way they used to do it.
Yeah, I think it has to be the case that some of those remote evaluation skills will continue, because it's just much more.
I mean, there is the advantage of being remote is that if you're not traveling, you can actually see a lot more games.
Yeah.
But the value of each observation is lower.
Right.
So which wins at the end of the day?
But it's going to democratize some things and give more scope for entry.
Yeah, probably will.
Yeah. John, Morgan?
Yeah, I totally agree with what John said. I mean, we have had to transition kind of overnight in baseball to like a very data and video heavy scouting process, which baseball is actually a pretty good fit for. I mean, you get like a remarkable amount of information when you're not there about, the revolutions per minute on the LSU starting pitcher's curveball, and you don't need to be there to know that information, and that's really important information when you make a draft decision.
But do you have to see his, his motion in person, or his pitching motion, or can you break it all down?
So interestingly, there's a video provider that works with the NBA and with us that is everywhere, and if you can subscribe to a service when you're a major league club or an NBA team, and they provide you like high quality multi-angle video footage of every game that guy ever played in college. And it's kind of remarkable, frankly, what you can do from your living room now. But you miss a lot, like a lot of the scouting profession is the other stuff, right? How the guy prepares, how he interacts with his teammates, how his, his personality, his work ethic. And that is very difficult to pick up, remotely. But, in terms of like the practical, we talk about a lot. I would have told you before COVID that I could not do my job remotely. It just wasn't possible, just given the amount of interaction I need to have with people. And but then it's funny, you're forced to do it, and you do it, right? And
you're in Wyoming right now.
Yeah, right. I've been living in Wyoming for 6 months, and with kind of minimal travel from here. So I hope that we come out of this with a more modern understanding of kind of not so much work-life balance, but just like location, like remote work, and allowing people, if it makes sense for their life and their family, to live somewhere else permanently or on a part-time basis, or selfishly, I just probably want to ski more. But I do think that there's a real argument for, there's parts of this work setup that work much better. And I think I get more work done in a day remotely than I ever did in the office. And I'm interested to see how that goes. And it's going to vary a lot company by company. Typically a lot of the senior executives are older, more traditional folks who like to see people in the office and don't really believe that you could be working hard if you're not there. But we'll see. I hope that, certainly you've seen it with a lot of technology companies that, they've moved to much more flexible models for people. And hopefully that will lead to more of that, because the tools are available now. Like Zoom, Slack, all, like you can do so much of what you used to be able to do in an office. Open question, but I'll be an advocate for it, at least at MLB, that we could give people a little flexibility in their lives.
I think these are huge issues for young parents in the workplace, especially, women, especially, as we've seen in the COVID crisis. Fed, what's going to be a permanent change in your job?
Yeah, I'll mention three things. I think professionally, obviously we don't have scouting. But our network has fundamentally changed, right? We went almost overnight from everybody going and swiping their card to everything is digital, or now everybody's tapping their card, which is great. Like contactless is just so much better, right? But that actually changed the drivers of our business very, very directly. And so it required us to think about, okay, like something we expected was going to happen naturally over 5 years just happened in 2 months. What are we going to do about it, right? How do we make that pivot quicker? So it actually challenged us a lot to accelerate and actually be really, really thoughtful about what you prioritize and what actually you just kind of jump ahead on. On the working together piece, I think there's a balance. Like, I agree with Morgan, right? Like, actually, the job I have right now was originally not even posted in Washington, D.C., which is the office where I work in. It was posted in our headquarters in Purchase, New York. But this situation allowed it to be, well, you're here, it's basically the same time zone, you can do it. And that opened up opportunities that wouldn't have been possible if I had not been in headquarters. And it has its benefits, right? For example, with our chief services officer, whereas before maybe I would have expected to be in the office to go meet with her, now I can just, we can jump on the phone and review something quickly for 30 minutes, when before I maybe would have gone on a training gone to New York to do it, right? So the ability to be flexible and just very quickly move through things regardless of location has definitely gone.
Yeah.
I think it impacts our ability to brainstorm too, right? Like you can't have that 3-hour brainstorming meeting where you have a whiteboard without getting Zoom fatigue. And finding that balance is important.
Yeah.
What I will say though is I agree for young parents, it definitely has been a load, but it has its think that's a silver lining too. There's a colleague I work with who, who had her son right before the pandemic, and actually being at home allowed her to carve out her day in a way she couldn't have done if she was in the office.
Mhm.
And so she works some amount of time. She has time to actually take care of her son and then go back to work, right?
Yeah.
If she was in the office, that wouldn't have been the case. And like, I agree with what Morgan and John are saying. It's like, can we now take that, be a little bit more modern about the thinking and say, wow, I can enable somebody who is fantastic at their job to be able to also balance this with something in their life that, is much more, is just as equally meaningful, if not